This is week 10 of college baseball rankings. Let's jump into it. And let me tell you, at around 12 to 25 or 12 to 35 even, it seems like every team just has no gap between each other. Just such a pile of teams that really you can put in any order and seem like you kind of know what you're saying. But yeah, just a lot of teams that have around like 12 to 15 losses that all have some good wins but have had bad weeks here and there. But I guess we'll just start things off at the top. One, two, three should be relatively simple. At least those three teams have separated themselves from the rest, being LSU, Wake Forest, and South Carolina. For me, that was the order that these teams were in. But yeah, what do you say?
Yep. Also have those same three in the same order: LSU, Wake Forest, South Carolina. And yeah, like you mentioned, I think there's a gap after those three teams right now. And just the way the season's gone with LSU, Wake Forest being 1-2, it's hard to move South Carolina any higher than that. But at this point into the year, I think you could say any three of those are your College World Series favorite, and I wouldn't really judge you for saying either of those three. I think they're pretty even in my eyes, but this is how the rankings are for now.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with South Carolina sweeping who we had at number four last week, Florida, on the week. They just had a perfect week. And especially right now, a lot of the top teams didn't have the best week or haven't looked great for the past few weeks. So South Carolina has really been able to take advantage of that as a team that started a lot lower in the rankings if they were ranked at all preseason. So they've just been slowly been able to climb up and recently really jump up the rankings and now able to secure a top three spot here. But after that, it can be a little interesting. Last week we had Vanderbilt at three, Florida four, Arkansas five. I think those teams are kind of the next grouping per se. For me, I went with Florida just because they got one win last week, and I didn't feel like I don't know. Vanderbilt really should stay as high as they could be because they didn't get any wins the past week and got swept at who we had at number 24, Tennessee. And Tennessee looks like they kind of finally got their mojo back a little bit. So that's good to see there. But Vanderbilt not getting a win, I felt like they should at least drop a few spots there. So Florida 4 for me, Vanderbilt 5, and then Arkansas 6.
Yeah, I have Vandy, Florida in the 4 or 5 spots here. Fine with putting Florida ahead of Vandy. I feel like up until this past week, those two were pretty even in my eyes for the most
Yeah.
part. But like you said, Florida being able to get one win, definitely good compared to 0-4 for Vandy. Yeah, I feel like with some of these teams that didn't have good weeks in the top 10, we've said it before that there's kind of separation after those teams, so didn't punish these teams a lot necessarily. Um, Arkansas, I did move down a bit more just because their series loss getting swept was by a team that's not in the rankings. A team we've said is decent this season, but not really a solidified tournament team up to this point.
Right.
Just a decent SEC team. So Arkansas is down an 8 for me. Um, I have
Okay.
Coast, I have Coastal and Stanford coming in before them.
Wow. All right. Coastal making a big jump. So for me, Arkansas, I think they had a few close games with Georgia, especially the final game there where Georgia was able to make a great comeback in the ninth. But I mean, the series was already lost at that point, so it would have been a tough week no matter what, even if they didn't get swept. But yeah, I think I just didn't want to drop them too far back just because we did say that like there has been that gap of those top teams, a lot of them being SEC, where maybe there isn't as much of a gap. Maybe it's close now, but I still think potentially Arkansas deserves to only drop like one or two spots from where they were last week, especially with other teams around that area also dropping. The likes of Virginia, we had at 7. They went 1-3, so another bad week for a team around that area, with them getting swept at Notre Dame, who looks to somewhat get hot in the moment. They're really picking things up recently with a few good series. but still, it's a team that you'd expect Virginia to beat, even though they were on the road there. East Carolina, another team in the top 10 last week that struggled. So it's really just a lot of these top 10 teams not doing well. And even after that, teams all over the place not having great weekends. So it's tough. But yeah, you said you had Coastal jumping up. We had them last week at 15. I didn't jump them up that much. I left them only getting up to 11 here, so kind of behind that clump of teams that we kind of mentioned there. But I did have Stanford jumping up a few spots, not too many considering they still only went 2-2 the past week and do have 12 losses, so they're kind of in that next grouping of teams for me. They did win the weekend series though, so that's definitely a good sign compared to other teams that got swept or lost their weekend.
Yeah, for me moving up Coastal, I felt like if you looked across rankings, we could have been a little low on them last week. Not by a whole lot necessarily, but definitely a bit compared to some rankings. And it's just tough. They've been playing really well. This is one of their better series wins, winning the series against Southern Miss, who was creeping into potentially our top 25 before this week.
Mm-hmm.
And the Coastal's also been picking up solid midweek wins as well, which we don't value quite as much. But when you're a mid major, those are the type of games you have to win to be able to move high up in the rankings. And I feel like they've been taking care of business this season and
Yeah.
kind of just went ahead and rewarded them just with how many top 10 teams lost and specifically got swept.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to mention at least Boston College because we did have them right above them in the rankings last week, and Boston College went 3-1. They lost to UConn midweek, but then swept a number 17 North Carolina. So that's a team we had just above Coastal Carolina and probably had a better weekend or better week overall in general, facing all ranked teams there. So I left Boston College ahead of Coastal, both of them jumping up. Boston College at 10 and then Coastal at 11 there. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's hard to argue that Coastal necessarily deserves to jump them in that sense, even though Boston College has been kind of up and down the past few weeks. They should be rewarded for winning a good week where they faced really tough competition.
Yeah, I also had Boston College moving up a bit. I also had them in the 10 spot like you did. I thought
Okay.
about moving them even higher as well, but as you had mentioned, kind of up and down. They had lost two series before this previously, one of them being getting swept by Louisville. So didn't really want to jump them
Sure.
back in like high into the top 10 after two bad weeks like that and just one good week making up for it. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. So, what is your after Vanderbilt? What's your the rest of your top 10 look like?
I go. So are we going? We're going Florida Vandy for 4-5.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay. So Florida Vandy, Coastal, Stanford, Arkansas, Campbell, Boston College.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. It's hard to process all that. Okay. So I have uh, Arkansas at 6, Campbell at 7, then Virginia, then Stanford, then Boston College Coastal. So kind of just a different ordering of pretty similar teams there. I feel like Campbell we had at 11 last week, so I just rewarded them for having a consistent week. They didn't face the best opponents, but look, they only have 8 losses on the year, and they've just been consistently winning, even though past week didn't wasn't a amazing competition, but they did well, and a lot of teams around them have been struggling at least a little bit recently. So I rewarded them by putting them up to 7. Maybe they're not a team you would necessarily think as a number 7 team in the nation, but at this point, with a lot of the teams struggling against some of their easier opponents or just being inconsistent with facing good teams, stuff like that, they just are consistently winning the games they need to jump over teams like that. And so I had Campbell 7, Virginia just dropping back one spot, even though a terrible week. It is their second straight week where they lost the series on the weekend, but still hard to move them down too far, especially with their record.
Yeah, I moved Virginia down a little bit more just because, like you said, it was back to back weeks.
Yeah,
I
I
had
think
them
that's
right.
fair.
I had them right behind the top 10 in the 11 spot. So still close up there, but felt like they needed to be dropped more than a couple spots since it was back to back weeks.
Yeah.
And then as far as Coastal jumping the likes of Campbell, I felt like all the sweeps just made me want to look at overall resumes a little more.
Yeah.
And I just feel better about Coastal's body of work right now compared to Campbell's, specifically Campbell with 15 wins over Q4 teams versus Coastal only having 4 wins over Q4 teams. So Coastal's
True.
strength of schedule is just much better, one of the better strength of schedules in the country versus Campbell, who's just kind of middle of the road, not playing great teams. Both have been playing very well and taking care of business, like we said, but I just feel more confident in Coastal as a team overall, just eye test and resume at this point.
Right. And so where did you end up with Stanford as well?
7.
Okay, so I had them at 9. So you're jumping up 3 spots, which isn't crazy considering that they still won their weekend series, but did end up 2-2 on the week. So not that much better than a lot of the 1-3s. Even though, yeah, Stanford's just been inconsistent. They're not showing their true potential really for the most part, or at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, no,
Seems like they have another gear to really kick things in that they haven't been able to reach yet. So should be interesting if they're able to get there. But yeah, they've just been kind of hobbling recently.
yeah. I mean, the reason I had them moving up was with Virginia having back-to-back bad weeks. Felt comfortable jumping them over them, and then
Sure.
Louisville obviously was
Right.
only a spot ahead of them, but was another team that had lost weeks before and then had just jumped back into our top 10. So I felt comfortable about jumping them over them, and then ECU just having a 1 in 3 weeks, not great as a mid.
Yeah, for sure. I had ECU dropping down a decent amount as well as Louisville, so they're not really in contention for that spot. It's just a matter of like, I don't know. I don't think Arkansas really should drop too much considering the teams that we have in this next grouping. Just because overall, look, Arkansas had a bad week against a mid-level SEC team, but they've shown that they can compete with the top dogs in the SEC, and they have like an overall pretty good record compared to other teams around this level. So I don't know how far we should really drop them, especially with like Coastal. They've faced tough teams, but look, they still have a worse record than Arkansas, who's in the SEC. So I don't know necessarily how you can really drop Arkansas past some of these teams uh, in the top 10.
Yeah, where do you want to see Arkansas end up at?
I mean, I had them at the 6, but I'm fine if they drop like a little bit further down. I just can't see them dropping like past 8 really.
Yeah, I would say I feel better about moving them back ahead of Stanford than I do Coastal. I just felt like we were a little low on Coastal, and
Yeah, I think that's
just
fair.
looking at their overall body of work, I was pretty impressed. They have like the 5th best strength of schedule in the country, which is pretty
Yeah.
crazy for a
Okay,
mid-major.
so what I'm thinking is, okay, maybe Arkansas we go for 6, and then yeah, maybe Coastal 7, Stanford 8, Campbell 9, Boston College 10, Virginia 11.
Yep, I'd be good with that.
Okay, now that we have the top 11, I guess, done, we have the next kind of grouping of teams. For me, it was the likes of Texas Tech, Kentucky, East Carolina, maybe Tennessee, maybe Louisville, but could definitely see Louisville dropping further. UConn, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of teams that can fit in this area. It seems just like I mentioned previously, teams from like 12 to 35 could all be ranked at like any of these spots, and it would seem like it's a normal ranking, feels like.
Yeah, the first group of teams you listed off there was pretty close to what I have here. I'll just go through like my next 6 because these
Sure.
are like this is kind of like the grouping I had for the next 6 spots, and felt
Okay.
like there was a little drop to the next area kind of. But
Sure.
I had ECU at
Mm-hmm.
12, followed by Texas Tech, Tennessee, Kentucky, Duke, and Louisville.
Okay. So you had Duke coming into the top 25 all the way into like the top 15-ish area. I had them a
Yeah,
little bit further back, but I can definitely see that they could be jumping up that high considering their resume overall and how they've looked recently and just being on the outside and getting pretty hot. So they could definitely make a big jump in, especially since the teams that they've faced are pretty good competition and they have looked really, really good for the most part and haven't been dropping games here and there. So somehow ended up with a 27-12 record while other teams ranked had a lot worse records. So we're able to definitely jump in and could jump that high. So I
yeah,
think, yeah, go ahead.
and that, I was gonna say I think it's one of those things where if they had a 3-1 week and either dropped their midweek or only won 2 out of 3 against Louisville, they probably don't move up this high. But I think the 4-0 week really emphasizes and gets them in there. And with Louisville dropping, since they had just moved back into our top 10 after a couple rough weeks, I felt like it was fair to drop them a little bit further after getting swept again and having an
Yep.
0-4 week. And I felt like the puzzle pieces just kind of connected to have Duke jump a slot ahead of them.
Definitely. So we had a similar like 12-14. So I think we should just nail that out of the way first. So I had Texas Tech, Kentucky, East Carolina. I think you had East Carolina, Texas Tech, Kentucky potentially, right?
Texas Tech, Tennessee, and then Kentucky.
Tennessee, you had jumping all the way up. I didn't feel really warranted jumping Tennessee up that high. I had them like at 16, but still in that same grouping.
Yeah.
Because they have 14 losses, and this is sure they swept Vandy, which is amazing. Yeah, rivalry series, top 5 team in the nation, that kind of beat. But this is like their first good series win, and they're still 1-9 on the road, so they haven't proven anything on the road yet. So they look like they've been a pretty good home team, but they need to get those road wins nailed down.
Yeah, the
But
thing that had me moving Tennessee up was, like you mentioned, the road record is definitely worrisome. But up until this, our huge drop for them, they've been like a fringe top 10 team, not really performing as well as we expected, but doing pretty well. And then their last 4 weekends have all been against top 10 teams, and they've gone 5-7 in that stretch, which I felt like is a lot better than most teams would do if they played 4 top 10 teams
sure.
in a row. So I felt pretty comfortable moving them back into like the middle of the rankings here. If it's a spot or two down, that doesn't bother me. But I just felt like sweeping that rivalry week hopefully gets them back on the right track for them. And I just felt like the 5-7 record against 4 top 10 teams in a row was actually pretty solid.
For sure. And mentioning another SEC team, Kentucky, they only have 9 losses, but they went 2-2 this week, and another weekend series loss. I think that's 3 in a row now. So even though they don't have many losses overall, they are just struggling to win SEC games consistently. And now they have, I think, 3 straight weeks against like top 5 or top 10 teams. So it's going to be a real struggle to get through that. I mean, if they do, then they prove themselves to definitely be a top 10 team, but it's going to be really tough for them. So I think that they haven't really proven that yet against not as great teams. I mean, this week, they faced Texas A&M, who's on the outside of the top 25 looking in. They're getting close again, but definitely on the outside for now. And they have not faced top SEC teams so far, and so that is a little bit worrisome for them there. So I think, yeah, they could be dropping a little bit more than I had them at, just considering everything, even though they only have 9 losses. But, yeah, I think East Carolina maybe should drop past Texas Tech just because they got swept on the weekend at Wichita State. Pretty terrible week. None of the weekend games were really close. So, yeah, and they just haven't looked good on the road, which is lucky for them that they're in the hosting conversation. But past that, it's not the best look. So, yeah, I think maybe Texas Tech, East Carolina is what I would go with here, and then maybe drop Kentucky a little bit past Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I was actually uh, pretty impressed with Texas Tech 4-1 on the week, picking up the series win against Baylor and then 2 wins against GCU in the midweek. Felt like that was a very solid week for them and about as good as you could hope for. It's hard to go 5-0 when you're playing pretty solid competition the whole week. So I'm comfortable
Definitely.
moving them up in this 12 spot.
And then after that, after East Carolina, we have the likes of, you mentioned Tennessee, Duke, Louisville, maybe Kentucky in there as well. So those four teams probably the teams to look at. I had UConn maybe a little bit outside of that bubble, but definitely could be worth a mention there. But Duke has just looked really hot recently, and they've looked like one of the better teams in the ACC. Unlike a lot of even the top teams have been struggling a little bit besides Wake Forest. So definitely able to jump in pretty quickly there. It's just a matter of where they end up being ranked. I think if we're going to rank them close to Louisville, I think Duke probably deserves to be above them, obviously, because they have the head to head. So if that is the case, then we'll have Duke above Louisville. But yeah, I don't know. Kentucky, Tennessee, we've kind of two ACC and two SEC teams here to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Kentucky and Tennessee are kind of in similar boats there, where we've had decent seasons. Kentucky a little better on the win loss record, but they just haven't performed extremely well against top competition yet. And waiting to see that from both of them. I feel like you could go either way here on that order.
Yeah, I'm good with. I mean, I had Kentucky at 13, so maybe just dropping them like one spot back, and then maybe Tennessee, Duke, Louisville, or some sort of order like that. We could
Yeah,
go Duke, Tennessee, Louisville, or Tennessee, Duke, Louisville. I don't know.
I like Kentucky, Tennessee, Duke, Louisville.
Okay, so 2-2 for each conference.
Yep.
All right, after Louisville at 17, the next grouping of teams that I had were UConn, Arizona State, Oregon State, maybe West Virginia in there as well, with Arizona State beating Oregon State. Obviously, I had them jumping them, and yeah, they were in the 22 spot last week, and even though they only went 2-2, it was a great turnaround of a week and made it pretty decent after starting pretty poorly. So offense really did well and showed what they're made of, especially against a pretty solid Oregon State pitching staff. And yeah, I think definitely they didn't have the top quality wins yet so far, and I think this definitely proves that they're in contention in the Pac-12 for sure.
Yeah, I had two teams moving up into the 18 and 19 spots that both had 4-0 weeks. And
Sure.
then after that, it was a just jumbled mess of teams that either lost their series and won the midweek or won their series and lost the midweeks. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't really necessarily do a lot of movement here. I dropped Oregon State because they actually lost their series versus the teams that
Yeah.
won a series and then just lost their midweek. So Oregon State dropped a bit for me, but the two teams I had moving up into 18-19, one newcomer into the rankings was West Virginia.
Sure.
Went 4-0 on the week, swept TCU, and they have that head-to-head over Oklahoma State as well. And Oklahoma State is who I had in the 19 spot after their 4-0 week sweeping Kansas.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State, yeah, jumped up a few spots for me, and I think definitely West Virginia can come into like that 18 spot. I'm good with that there, but I do think maybe we leave like Arizona State above Oklahoma State just to show the gap between them and Oregon State a little bit more prominent than it was. But we also have UConn. I feel like UConn deserves a shout here, even though they went 3-2. It was a good week. They face Northeastern, who is a team that's kind of right on the outside of the top 25, even though they lost, and then they were able to beat. They went to Boston College, who was number 14 and now is even higher at number 10 for us. They were able to win there and then won their weekend series. So I think you kind of expect I don't know, 3-2 week is pretty good for them. I mean, it could have been better, obviously, but I feel like 3-2 is definitely a positive. So I think that they should definitely rise in the rankings here, and I think the opportunity was there to do that. So maybe have UConn at like that 18 or 19 spot with West Virginia as well.
Yeah, I'd be good with that. Like you mentioned, that midweek win over Boston College is definitely big. The 3-2 week doesn't look great, but that is a solid midweek win there. Um,
Yeah, and even their loss midweek to Northeastern is still not terrible, all things considered, with how good Northeastern has been for the most part.
Yeah, I'd be fine with going either Yukon or West Virginia in the 18 spot, I think.
Yeah, I think we go West Virginia then Yukon.
Okay.
I think that makes the most sense to me. And then we have some Pac-12 teams in Oklahoma State that we can fit in there as well. All right, so top 20 now. I think what we can't. I'd say we move Arizona State here, jumping up a few spots to just give them some room between them and Oregon State because I don't think Oregon State really deserves to fall too much further down than they are considering the other teams ranked around this area. But we also have Oklahoma State that probably could jump up. So I don't know. I think maybe we go Arizona State, Oklahoma State, then Oregon State. A lot of states there, but I think that might be the best order for them.
Yeah, that's probably good. Yeah, I originally didn't have Arizona State moving in mind and just more so had Oregon State dropping since they
Sure.
were the only team in this area to lose their series. I had originally had Oregon and Arizona State just staying in their same spot since they were 2-2 with series wins and then was
Right.
compensating by dropping Oregon State, but
Yeah,
I
the only
think
reason I had to kind of give Oregon State some room before like the end of the top 25 was just because they have the head to head against Oregon. So I wanted to kind of keep that true there by having them just a little bit ahead of them. Since I still also had Oregon in the rankings there after going 2-2 the past week. So yeah, that's why I felt like maybe Arizona State deserves to jump up a bit and have Oregon State maybe not drop too far back from where they were since they were 18 this past week, and having them at like 21 or something or 22 would be a good fit.
yeah. So should we go Arizona State, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, Oregon?
Yeah, that works for me. And then we're left with two spots left, and one of them should be a newcomer, or at least one of them. For the 24 and 25 spots, I had 24 Dallas Baptist coming into the rankings this week at 31 and 9 overall after having a 4 and 0 week, sweeping Louisiana Tech over the weekend. I think they should be ranked definitely at this point. They've only had one bad week. It was against Southern Miss and they got swept. But besides that, they've just had a really complete season so far at 15 and 3 in their conference. Really just the top dogs there and deserve to be ranked at this point for me. And then at 25, UTSA struggled a little bit this past week, going 2-2. But I didn't necessarily feel like they should drop out, considering that they still did win their weekend series, and just give them a little leeway there. Just don't want to bring a team into the top 25 and drop them out straight away, especially like a mid-major team that has been really consistent throughout the season.
Yeah. DBU was a team that I really wanted to put into my rankings, but didn't think a spot had
Yeah,
really opened up for them. I mean, I was going back and forth between them and Miami as my team to jump into the rankings
sure.
here, since we had Miami as our team right on the edge of it, and
Yeah,
they went 3-2 on the week, so not like necessarily ideal, but they did win their weekend series. And since we were kind of just waiting on them to see if they would win another series, I went ahead and put them in.
sure.
But it was definitely a tough call. DBU was my next team on the list I was going for, and then
Yeah, I think it's just really tight at the end of things.
yeah, it is. And I dropped UTSA out of my rankings. Didn't like doing that with a 2-2 week, but sometimes that's what you get when you're a mid-major at the end of the rankings. Going
Yeah,
2-2 is just tough against just okay competition. And I left Texas in at the 25 spot. I felt decent about leaving Texas in just because before getting swept by Oklahoma here, they did have quite a few good weeks in a row. So I felt comfortable leaving them in. And it's just that's a long drop from 13 to falling all the way out. So I wanted to
yeah.
leave them in. And they had beaten some good competition in the Big 12 before this weekend. So kind of just wanted to leave them in, not punish them all the way by dropping them out completely.
Yeah, the reason that I felt comfortable dropping them out was because, like last week, the previous weeks, Texas has risen. I wouldn't say an unwarranted amount, but it's kind of just they rose because other teams around them did bad and not necessarily because Texas was putting together an amazing run. Sure, they were winning most like a majority of their games, or at least over 50%, but they weren't like wowing everybody necessarily. They weren't going like flawless in a week, even though to get to the rankings they were on like a 13 game win streak or whatever. But after that, once they got there, they've just been kind of teetering along, doing a little bit better than teams here and there, and kind of capped for what I thought was like the run of teams last week at least that really you could interchange a lot and be fine with the rankings there, even though they were 13, being like at 16 or 18 or whatever wouldn't seem too far off necessarily. They just kind of took advantage of little things here or there that were able for them to rise up. But they had 15 losses, and look, their resume isn't all that amazing. Sure, they had a really good run. They've beaten some pretty decent teams, but it's not like an SEC team or an ACC team where you're just facing week in, week out really good competition. So, I don't know. Getting swept versus Oklahoma at home, just a terrible week, and they didn't look particularly good. So, yeah, I just feel like they primarily rose due to teams doing bad around them and not because they were just outstanding. So, for them to play bad, I feel like that's just warrants them dropping back. And a lot of these teams right outside the top 25 have a lot better records and might have better resumes at this point, too. So, that's why I felt kind of comfortable doing that. And I think we should probably mention some of the teams right outside the top 25 that we haven't yet that could definitely or probably should be in the top 25 this week if things were a little bit different. I think Northeastern looked at 32-7, so one of the best records in the NCAA. They went 4-0. They beat what was number 21 UConn and then swept their weekend series, even though it wasn't against good competition. They're consistently showing that they're a team to watch out for in the postseason. And other teams, we got the combo of Indiana and Indiana State, just both consistently doing well and somehow have jumped up into the RPI. It looks like I think Indiana State's at like 10 and Indiana's at 11, so really up there and deserve a shout in the top 25 if they had the opportunity. Indiana went 5-0, beat Louisville midweek and Cincy, and then swept their weekend series. Indiana State went 3-0. I think they're playing game also on Monday, so that could kind of further that. And they went to what was number 3 Vandy and won a game there, and then also won both their games on the weekend. So these teams consistently proving it recently, and looks like the top dogs in their leagues, and yeah, could be ranked very soon if they keep it up. But just no spots really opened up for them. For us, it seems like. But yeah, a lot of teams right outside the top 25 that could do for a mention here.
Yeah, a couple other teams that I would mention right outside the top 25. One of them that has been in this area for a couple weeks now, starting to resurge a little bit, is Maryland. 3-1 week with the series win over Purdue. Not a crazy impressive week, but a team with one of the tougher strength of schedules in the country, like we've said week after week, and they're just starting to consistently win series again. So they're knocking on the door here and potentially just waiting for one of these spots to open at the back end. Another team who also didn't have that impressive of a week, but I think is right outside here, is Virginia Tech, who went 2-2 on the week, had a series win against Florida State, but dropped their midweek game. But I think that series win over Florida State is big as they just continue to improve their ACC record. And if their ACC record gets to a point where they just keep winning, I think it'll be hard to keep them out of this top 25, just given the talent level and where we had them ranked earlier in the season. I think this team has an extremely high ceiling. And so if they really start to put it together, I think that potential is coming to realization a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I don't know if there are any other teams. I mean, we had Florida Gulf Coast in the rankings recently. They haven't looked amazing right outside the top 25, so kind of just sitting there. And then Texas A&M has slowly been working their way back up, like we mentioned previously, so good to see. And USC is kind of a little bit further back probably, but also deserves a mention. I mean, they just had a good series against UCLA, kicking them out of the top 25. So, yeah, I think for me, maybe that we have 2 spots left and kind of 4 teams to fight for it. And I think we have DBU, UTSA, Miami, and Texas. I I really think DBU deserves a spot. Maybe we just put DBU and Miami both in, kick out Texas and UTSA, just because I think Miami deserves a spot over Texas. If we're looking at it like that, they have very similar records, and I just think the overall competition that Miami faces is just a lot better, and they're probably a better team. They've just looked better against better teams probably.
Yep, that was going to be my exact suggestion as well. I also really wanted DBU in the rankings, just didn't pull the trigger on it. And then Miami, we were a bit low on, tried keeping them out an extra week, but they won their series again. So I feel like it was time to put them in as well. So I'm good with putting Miami, DBU in, and either order is fine with me.
Yeah, it seems like whatever week we put Miami in, the next week they'll be out anyway, so we'll see. I mean, I'm fine with DBU 24 and then Miami 25, but we'll see. Miami will probably lose this weekend, and then we'll drop them back out, so it'll be a great time.
Yep.
Sweet. So that is the rankings. We'll do a quick rundown, and then that'll be that. This is week 10 of college baseball rankings, starting at 25 with Miami, then DBU, then Oregon, Oregon State, Oklahoma State, Arizona State at 20, UConn, West Virginia, Louisville, Duke, Tennessee at 15, Kentucky, East Carolina, Texas Tech, Virginia, Boston College at 10, Campbell at 9, Stanford 8, Coastal Carolina 7, Arkansas at 6, Vanderbilt 5, Florida at 4, South Carolina 3, Wake Forest at 2, and LSU still in that number 1 spot.